Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and welcome to another episode of my ISTJ info dumping series, the only place on YouTube where you can find an ISTJ talking about ISTJ stuff, because somehow we get a reputation that we're super duper exclusive and don't like sharing things to people. I've gotten a lot of people tell me that I am probably not an ISTJ, although at the very least, a lot less people than when I used to think I was ESTJ. How could I have ever thought that in hindsight? And I thought it would be fun to sort of play a little bit of devil's advocate with these naysayers and, oh, Paul, you're actually this type, and just tell them, no, you're wrong, but let me tell you how likely you are that you're wrong. So I've got the 15 other types labeled in order of most likely that could be my other type, down all the way to least likely. Now I could get one or two slightly off, but I tried to think really hard about the function stack and about the types of functions, the order that they're placed in, whether or not it's a judging or perceiving function, what the inferior is, etc. And I just tried to think, okay, these just don't seem the most like me. So, without further ado, we will start from the bottom this time. I typed this totally the wrong way, so we're going to go from the bottom, the least likely, like no way could I be typed as that, and then go up from there. So, the least likely possibility, in my opinion, that I could be mistyped at is none other than the INFJ. I find those characters so confusing that it often hurts my brain just trying to decode how they talk. A lot of times they're pleasant to talk to, but long-term relationships just seem like an impossible ordeal. Like, even just getting them, like, even if I just ask, how are you doing today? They have like an existential crisis trying to figure out how to say it. And it's like, come on, is your brain really that complicated? Overall, they like to overanalyze things, and they have this like piercing stare where they can like tell what other people are feeling. I can't do that. I am pathetic at empathy. So the fact that most INFJs end up being very empathetic just doesn't sound like me at all. Plus they have inferior sensing, which is extremely silly to think that I would have anything other than dominant sensing. So the fact that I can't understand them one bit, and I don't see myself even being able to imitate them very properly without people saying, you're only imitating them because you're using your introverted sensing to recall moments with your friend. Confused yet? So am I. Let's continue. The 14th least likely rating would be the ENFJ. I find it slightly easier to think that I might be ENFJ just because they have a little bit more confidence than the INFJ. And they do have sort of a let's get things done type of approach, which sounds nice in principle. The problem is that they lead with dominant extraverted feeling, which I don't think I have extraverted feeling, as much as people would like to think that I do. One of the things that bothers me the most about extroverted feeling, especially in the dominant function, is that they have a really hard time explaining the reasoning behind their actions and usually give this vague, abstract definition that is supposedly justified, but it doesn't make sense if you look at it from a pragmatic lens. Or if you're even the slightest bit rational, you could be like, you do realize I could name like 15 things wrong with your argument right now, and they'll say, I know, but I don't care. It's what I'm going by. And they also have this like forceful demeanor where it's like you don't do what they want and all hell breaks loose. Not only that, but they share the functions of the INFJ, but in a different order. And even though I still don't see myself being a dominant feeler, I at least understand ENFJs ever so slightly more. Because their intuition being secondary means that they're going to be slightly better at explaining themselves. But that's not really saying much. Next up is the INTP, the science nerd that is okay to talk to for a couple of seconds, but prolonged conversations just drain the heck out of me with them. I see it as more likely than the ENFJ because thinking is on top, and I'd like to think I'm a pretty logical person, but I think INTPs just take that logical center of their brain and just, like, go all out with it, to the point where I get a little bit tired. I start to think, wow, Do you have to think logically about everything? Like, can't we just think about what's in the here and now? And they also tend to, like, go into these, like, long-winded, dreamy tangents, like, what if this world is secretly an illusion? And it kind of saps the fun out of reality, if I'm being honest. They are laid back and easygoing, which seems a lot more like me in recent years. I used to be super stubborn and stuck up, but nowadays I could see myself relating more to the perceiving types. However, I think that's the least likely because of that combination of introverted thinking and extroverted intuition that just doesn't sit well with me. And inferior feeling? Please. I may not be good at empathy, but I'd like to think that my emotions are somewhat developed. Next up is the ENTJ. I'm surprised this wasn't all the way at the bottom because ENTJ is my least favorite type. I have a friend who's ENTJ who's pretty cool, but every other type that I've heard of that's like that and everything I've read just makes me just sick to my stomach every time I think about them. They have sort of this get it done even if it can't be done vibe, and they usually have a well, the ends justify the means type of statement, and that just makes me cringe. I don't like how their feeling is all the way at the bottom, so that means they often like trample over people mercilessly, possibly in a literal sense, and like hardly think about it at all. And it just seems like they would be like the stereotypical villain of every book and movie and video game. And I'd like to think that when I am nice, I am very nice, and ENTJs are mostly nice because they're either trying to make a good impression or because they're so extroverted that they need that attention, and the only way they're going to get attention is if they're nice so that they don't scare everyone away. That's terrible. I want to be, if I need either rest or socialization, I don't want it to be at the expense of other people's lives or their livelihood or anything like that. But I do think it's more likely than the INTP because at least they have extroverted thinking. So they're very pragmatic and realistic about things. They see things sort of as they are, even if when they're wrong they refuse to admit it. But at the very least, I can respect their top function being extroverted feeling way more than the INTP. Next up is the ENTP. I find this only slightly more likely than the ENTJ because they are fairly easygoing, creative people. And I've definitely been entertaining ideas of having more creative stuff on my channel, such as when I've tried to make spirit battles for things. And I do find myself doing devil's advocate type arguments quite a lot. However, ENTPs use their tertiary extroverted feeling sometimes as a way of getting on people's nerves, and they also have a habit of like second guessing every single thing, which sounds a little bit like me if you think about it. Like oftentimes I say, why are you having so many people at a wedding? Isn't that cost efficient? But they have introverted thinking. So they're not going to be thinking about it from a pragmatic, how much money are we going to lose? They're going to think about it more of like, it's fun to challenge the social status. Plus they have inferior introverted sensing, which means their memory is like that of a goldfish. And I have a nearly photographic memory, so that just doesn't make any sense. ESFJ is next, mainly because it's a sensing type, so of course it's going to be more likely than all these N's here. I don't really like ESFJs all that much, to be honest. If they stay out of my personal life, sure, whatever, but they tend to be even bossier than the ENFJ because their introverted sensing is going to look at the way things have already been done as opposed to trying to think of a new system. And because they're leading with feeling and then the introverted sensing, they're not going to analyze the situation first. They're just going to go for it. And if their feelings happen to be wrong on the situation, they're not going to want to back down very easily, if at all, and if they do, they start sobbing and whining and crying, and it just starts getting insanity. And with their inferior function being introverted feeling, it's like, come on, did you think that through for even 2 seconds? Ugh. However, credit where credit is due. They do have a very like nurturing, motherly, caring type of side, and while I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near a mother type figure, I would say that if I had to choose between the two, like the more strict, domineering dad versus the more, let me tell you how the world works, I think I would pick the latter one, just because that fits more to my more easygoing, slightly blunt, but not overly strict type of personality. Next up is the ESTJ, which is actually what I used to think I was, because I can be outgoing. However, as I've said multiple times on this channel, outgoing does not equal extroversion. There are outgoing introverts and shy extroverts. INFJs and ENFPs are the prime example of those two categories. And even though I definitely do not see myself as an ESTJ anymore, that inferior feeling causes them to throw hissy fits if things don't go according to plan. And I don't really do that. Sure, I'll get agitated, but usually I try to think of a backup plan in case the original plan goes wrong. Whereas because they lead with extroverted thinking, they're going to have this plan set so far that their tertiary intuition is going to make them want to go for it. Whereas I have inferior intuition, so I'm not going to be thinking that far ahead at all. I can see it as only a tad bit more likely than ESFJ because they have the same function stack as the ISTJ. And I can see myself as being an ESTJ wannabe if I'm forced to. Like when I chaperone conferences, I'm pretty sure that's what most of the teenagers think that I am, because I'm that guy that'll make sure every single rule is being followed. If the lights out is supposed to be at 11 and it's 10:59, I will say you have exactly 1 minute before I'm shutting off the lights. If you have to go to the bathroom, too bad. I told you 30 minutes ago to go to the bathroom. I can be like that. I don't prefer it, but if I have to, I guess I will. Next up is INTJ. It makes me kind of uncomfortable to think that an intuitive type would be this high on the list, but ever since my best friend came over today, I can't deny the possibility is somewhat there. There are a lot of things that he and I are both very, very similar on, but also very, very different. Like, once we finish processing a potential way of thinking, we generally have the same reasoning behind it. A lot of the things he struggles with, I struggle with as well, but one of us usually has it worse than the other because everyone is different in how their functions develop. He tends to be more of his face doesn't show any emotion, and I'm kind of like that too now that I think about it, but in my case, I think the tertiary feeling leads more to oftentimes my emotions are either downplayed or they're not expressed unless I'm really comfortable with someone. However, INTJs, not as much as INFJs, can still be pretty confusing when they get into their what-if scenarios and can be totally oblivious to what's going on around them. It actually makes me laugh so much that oftentimes I'll make fun of my best friend for the littlest things that he does. I think he's amazing. I wouldn't want to trade him for anything, but man, can he be klutzy, driving right past the driveway when I literally pointed out where we needed to go, and he'll still drive past it. I don't know. Just doesn't seem like inferior sensing is for me. Plus, when inferior extroverted sensors are in the grip, they tend to binge eat, and I binge avoid eat when I'm stressed. So, nope, not for me. INFP is the next variable because, again, same functions, different order. I can see introverted feeling definitely coming across pretty strong when I explain about topics that are of a more, I guess, subjective nature. I guess you could say when I talk about things like how excited I am that Banjo is in Smash, how much I hate Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival, that can come across as really strong introverted feeling. But where INFPs are a little bit different than the ISTJ is that every decision is based on this interior feeling, whereas I would try to consider the practical benefits and how well it lines up with an effective past. Most of the time, my past. Whereas INFPs tend to have this sort of foggy view of the past, only as a guideline, but not as the go-to end-all for everything. I am constantly reliving the past, and INFPs are say what? I forgot what I had for breakfast. And that just seems a little bit too scatterbrained for me. However, their love of beauty and arts is admirable, even if personally I get a little bit confused when they try to talk about it. Plus, they can be a little bit forceful when they get angry, and they tend to get really moody and take things personally, and that's not really what I do. Even if I do take things personally, I don't really make a big fuss out of it. I'll very calmly just bring up the issue to someone I trust, or I'll bring it up with my mom, talk about it a bit, and then get over it. Which I don't really see INFPs doing, but at least their function stack makes sense, and certain bits of them come together. Like, I'm like, yeah, I guess I can sort of see why you did that. But based on how the functions are all over the place, I can say, yeah, I'm either more or less intense than that. Next up is the ISTP. I really think ISTPs are pretty fascinating from a function standpoint because even though they come across as so cold and unemotional, if you look at it strictly from the 8 functions, they're actually significantly more polite than the INTPs, despite having feeling at the bottom. I think it's because ISTPs have a very approach the world through a realistic lens, and I really admire that a lot because I like to see the world through very pragmatic, realistic eyes. And even though they use introverted thinking to come up with their own conclusions to things, I still can see certain speech patterns that they say emerging in my own speech. Like, I can see myself having that gruff Harrison Ford voice that's just like, ugh, you're all a bunch of idiots. But I still don't see myself having inferior feeling, especially not extroverted, because ISTPs, as low as their extroverted feeling is, they have their moments where they can tell exactly how the crowd is feeling. Me, I don't tend to have that effect much at all because I kind of lose myself when I'm in a crowd. Also, ISTPs have extroverted sensing, which allows them to have a hands-on approach to everything, which really doesn't feel like me at all because I pretty much need people to tell me step by step exactly what to do. ISTPs are I'll figure it out as I go along, which I can sometimes do, but most of the time I can't. Otherwise, I probably would have made the previous video that I thought of. So moving into the top 5. The number 5 possibility of what type I could be besides ISTJ would be the ENFP. They're actually my favorite type, so this may be a little bit of bias. ENFPs are my top 4 functions, but reversed. And a lot of times when I talk to ENFPs, I feel like I'm talking to a reflection of myself, because where they're weak, I'm strong, and vice versa. And a lot of what they go through, I feel like I can really totally empathize with that, just on a more intense or less intense scale, because they're using their functions in the opposite order. A lot of times they'll be complaining about their problems, and I'll say, I have no problem with that. But then I'll bring up something that I'm good at, and then the ENFP will start laughing and be like, oh my gosh, I can barely stand to do that. So it leads to a very much opposites attract type of dynamic. And they say that inside every ISTJ is an ENFP, and I definitely have my moments where I can just be really silly and think about stupid, unrelated, tangential stuff on the spot. The problem is that I don't do it enough to make it consistent, whereas ENFPs sort of live by that unpredictability. They also have a tendency to constantly be having new things introduced, whereas I take my sweet time to do that. And that's why I usually don't play indie games, because that fear of the unknown, that fear of wasting money on something that was trash, I think ENFPs would be more willing to have that risk. But the opposite function stack definitely comes into play when I'm stressed out. And so I guess you could say when I'm unhappy, that's the same as when they're happy. Strange, but moving on. Next up is the ISFP. I can really respect the laid-back, easygoing nature of the ISFP, because even though I put this a little bit higher than INFP, that's because they're very imaginative, far-reaching types of people, whereas ISFPs are going to be down-to-earth, grounded in reality because of their extroverted sensing. Also, even though their extroverted thinking is inferior, it still exists, which leads to them having the ability to be confrontational if they need to, even though they don't really want to. And their introverted feeling means they're always going to be very true to themselves, and they're not going to want to change for the better of another person. Which is great, because they have that awareness of who are they at their core? And I think that's really admirable, because I don't really like trying to be something that I'm not. I try to keep skits and character role-playing to a minimum in my videos, because I like what my friend Jason said when I posted a couple of written reviews on my Facebook. He said, Paul, you just have this Paulism style that no one else has, and you can totally tell that you were the one that wrote it because there's no one else that writes like you. So I can see myself having that authentic, need for self type of mindset and having sensing on there. Also big props, because I like to think about the real world. I'm usually pretty aware of what's going on around me. The problem is that ISFPs are known as the partying introverts because of that extroverted sensing being in the secondary slot. So they tend to be the introverts that have the most fun at parties and gatherings. And their introverted feeling is going to make them more tolerable of less than desirable people than, say, the ISTP, where they'll just be like, forget it. The ISFP might at least stick around and pretend to smile. I also don't see myself having intuition anywhere near or anywhere other than the 4th position, because ISFPs can, I guess, sort of see the future. Me, not so much. Next up is the ESFP, only slightly higher than the ISFP because they have a dominant perceiving function, that being their extroverted sensing. And even though when I see extroverted sensing in motion, it definitely comes across as like, too much stimulation, I at least respect the way the ESFP processes the world. I have a good friend. Her name's Teresa. We actually did an interview together if you want to check it out. And I see myself relating a lot to the basics for how she gets to a conclusion. The way she reacts to the conclusion is often different. Like, she'll be the one that claps her hands to her mouth or will voice out how sad she is that a character died in a movie. But then she'll talk about how she got to that conclusion that made her sad, and I'll say, oh yeah, I thought about that too, except I tried to think about the logical outcome. So in that respect, we get along a lot, and the fact that there's like a hidden depth to their emotions, even though they're extroverts, and they do have a very exuberant, wear their heart on their sleeves type of personality, there's still that little bit of them that they're going to hold back. And I really appreciate that, because it means that if I get to know them on a personal basis, I can really feel a sense of satisfaction in breaking them down and getting them to reveal the core of who they are. However, dominant extroverted sensing has a tendency to always want to be experiencing something new. But unlike the ENFP, the ESFP is going to want to go for something that's possible. So whereas the ENFP might be dreaming of new abstract possibilities, the ESFP will look at possibilities that already exist and say, how can I get to them? They might say, I want a pizza. The ENFP might be like, I would want spaghetti noodles that I can roll down a chocolatey slide. Something like that. So I don't know, I'm just not very good with crowds and big noises, and sometimes I don't even like the sound of my own voice. That's why I usually turn down the volume so low on these videos. So the fact that they seem to thrive in this kind of loud pop star type of environment just doesn't seem like me at all. Next up is ESTP, which when I get in my easygoing moods, I sometimes seriously contemplate whether, if I wasn't on the spectrum, if I probably would have been an ESTP. Because deep down inside, on the few very rare occasions when I actually am in a big crowd, I do have a desire to talk to everyone. The problem is that I don't, because I'm afraid that my intentions will be misconstrued and they won't be able to see it as just an innocent conversation, and I'll be called a whole bunch of names, like maybe a pedophile or a rapist or a molester. And even though the chances of that are incredibly slim, I don't really want to take the chance at all. Whereas I think an ESTP would say risk is part of life. You just got to go for it. They say that ESTP is a good match for ISTJs romantically, and I can see that working out to an extent. We have the same general functions, but the introvert-extrovert is swapped. And I think it would lead to both of us helping the other step outside our comfort zone. I could also see that laid-back nature being really nice. The reason why I see it as being slightly higher than the ESFP is that they're going to use thinking as their main way of coming to conclusions, which is just like what I do. So as opposed to the ESFP, where they're going to think about the emotional outcome of what they're sensing, they're going to think about the logical outcome. And even though it's introverted thinking, it's at least high enough and also low enough where it doesn't come across as super long-winded and confusing like, say, the INFJ tries to do. Now, the number one, which I'm pretty sure all of you have suggested at some point, would be none other than the lovely ISFJ. Because same dominant function, same inferior function, I mean, that in and of itself causes an avalanche of similarities. Because when you share the same dominant function, your way of processing the world is going to be pretty much identical. Both of us live in the past. both of us have a long list of facts and personal details that we're constantly living by. And the inferior extroverted intuition means we're going to be like, oh, not an experiment. Let me tell you, I was cringing to pieces when I saw the reveal at the end of the Nintendo Treehouse Live when they revealed that Bakugan game coming to Switch. I was like, oh no, this is going to be a disaster. And a lot of times we don't give the benefit of the doubt because we're so afraid of failure. Now, they have extroverted feeling as their secondary function, which leads to them being a lot more empathetic and caring. And even though I want to be like that, well, I don't know how much I'd want to be empathetic. I'd like to be maybe a little bit, but not too much, to the point where I'm like feeling someone else's pain when they get stabbed in the side. But I definitely think being an ISFJ for a few minutes wouldn't be too bad. It would definitely be nice if people would know me as the guy that, is always dependable and there for people. Whereas I think ISFJs are more, known for always being polite to everyone. They also have kind of an aversion to conflict because their tertiary introverted feeling makes it really hard for them to explain their points when they actually do use their logic, which I don't have trouble with at all. Whether people get what I'm saying or not, I don't know. But as far as the amount of physical it takes to get out my point, it's usually less than zero effort. I'm just like, yeah, let me tell you exactly what I'm thinking. So in that respect, I disagree. But they're the only type on this whole list that also has dominant introverted sensing, which is me to a T. If I could tell you the amount of things that I list in my head and all the notes I have on my desktop that have lists upon lists upon lists, how do you think I keep track of how many video game reviews I've done and how many subscribers I have and how many songs are in Smash Brothers? Yeah, it seems pretty obvious that if I were to be any other type, it would be the ISFJ. But what do you think? Do you think I'm totally off the rocker? Do you think, Paul... Don't kid yourself. You actually are an ISTJ. You're just old, so you've had time to improve your bottom functions. Which is why I really hope, because this is a trademark of mature ISTJs, I really hope that those of you that have stuck around long enough, that you will stick around for as long as I live, and I promise you that I will never abandon you or forget about you or anything like that. ISFJs, you cross them, you're dead. I'm going to try to be as loyal as possible. So, in the long run, I am an ISTJ. But since Myers-Briggs is not supposed to be an exact representation of every little facet of every single person's life, of course there's going to be variables based on personal circumstances. The fact that I have autism probably exaggerates some of the functions to begin with. And the fact that I'm the only me in the whole world. So, if there's a personality called Paulism, I'm the only one that has it. So, with that, thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and trust me the next time I say that I'm an ISTJ. I did my research. Bye-bye.